Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 53.
I would really love to change the conversation about what it means to learn, what it means to be educated, and what role that plays in the development of our society, because I feel like currently our society is very confused about what it means to be educated, what it means to be smart.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Lisa. Lisa is a teacher for 15 years, long enough to see her elementary students grow up and start to graduate from college, which she loved a lot. But education is a very different field now than when she entered. After clearly seeing the limits of what the system can do for kids and families, she made the difficult decision to leave the education field to focus on educating her own child. She's currently finishing up her last year as a full-time instructor, working as a curriculum developer and instructor at the Museum of Natural History in New York City, and is eagerly preparing to homeschool. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you very much. Glad to talk to you.
I'm so excited. I just told Lisa that our listenership in New York City is actually we have more listeners than in Montana. So it's fun to have somebody from the East Coast. Lisa, I kind of explained to our audience a little bit about you. Do you kind of want to expound upon that? Tell us about your family, your hobbies, and then, of course, your profession and what you're planning on doing.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I've been in the education field actually before I even graduated from college. But since I graduated from college, I started teaching right away. My first job was as an instructor for students with autism, and I worked in that program for a couple of years, got a lot of great experience. I was in graduate school while that was going on, and in the process of going through graduate school, I was in a number of different school environments. And then my last student teaching placement was in a private, non-public school for children with learning disabilities, which I stayed at and now have been teaching at for the past 15 years. And, in between that, I met my husband. I also traveled to many different countries around the world on 6 continents. The only one I'm missing is Asia. Have not worked up the courage to get the vaccinations and go over to Asia yet. I hate crowds, but I'm dying one day to go. But I've been to Antarctica, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, Iceland. I've done a couple of archaeological digs, and that has actually become sort of a passion for me. The museum class that I teach and develop is on archaeology. I also do a number of other things for the museum at this time. Other hobbies include things like history, really dig into Roman history, which, some of the traveling contributed to that. I hiked Hadrian's Wall right after I met my husband. That was the last time I traveled abroad. My husband and I got married. We had my gorgeous son, who's about to be 2. And I think I planned originally to continue to work and to have my son in daycare and in preschool, because a lot of my early experiences with children was in the early childhood field, and I had a really positive view of daycare and nursery school and kindergarten. But, what I was picturing and what my experience was as an instructor and as a volunteer is very different, I believe, than what is actually happening in those programs now. So I have really changed my mind quite significantly about my plans for my own child and then my plans actually for myself.
Wow. What is your experience in that realm? I mean, as a volunteer, sometimes we have more of a rosy colored, but as a parent, what's your views on that with early child development? Do you feel like that's important?
I think it's really important for children to have a rich early experience, whatever form that might take, depending on the family circumstances and, lifestyle and values. That could look very different for different people. As a volunteer and teacher, and some of my early special ed experiences were also with early childhood, and it is a really rich time for intervention if the child has significant developmental issues, and a lot of great progress can be made before children would even be entering school. So, I'm not saying that children shouldn't go to early childhood programs at all, but what I am saying is that those programs have ceased to meet our children's developmental needs, even for those students who have a range of typical development. They need ample time to play. They need to be outside. They need to be able to make a lot of choices. They don't need to be worrying about some of these pre-academic skills that we are so eager for them to learn.
Like trying to make them read at 3 or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, my own son is turning 2. He's starting to identify letters because he has toys and he thinks it's fun. And he crawls around on his rug and there's the names of planets printed on his rug. So he finds that enjoyable. But if I were to sit down and try to force him to learn it, even as a 4 or 5-year-old, if I turn it into a chore and pencil and paper before his muscles are ready to do that and his eye coordination is ready, then what I'm going to end up creating is a failure situation. And as a special educator today, my 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, I really see the effects of trying to force children to do something that their brains and muscles are not ready to do. And there's really no need for it because the research does not support the fact having students do this earlier and earlier and having it lead to some greater and greater achievement.
Yeah.
So, I really feel like as a society, we have become very fearful and very anxious. I think that some of the economic issues that we've had have made people very worried about their children's future, but I don't think that the answer is to limit their childhood experience and take away the valuable playtime. I think that the answer is to actually give them a very rich, open, beautiful, free early childhood experience where they have a lot of opportunities, and you can offer them various opportunities and then give them the choice, because taking that choice, they develop their executive functioning skills, they learn how to focus, they learn how to sustain attention for a long time. They learn how to transition from one thing to another thing instead of somebody else artificially always controlling it.
Yeah.
And I see for children with learning issues, one of the main problems is their inability to problem solve and to make transitions between activities and to have the right level of concentration and stamina for the right activity. And I think part of it is that that's naturally something that they struggle with, but the other part is that as adults, lately in society, we've been so over-controlling that they've just never had the opportunity to even practice those skills.
Wow.
And then as kids get older, I really see a limiting of what subjects they're exposed to, what level of choice that they have. And I think that there are a million ways to learn how to read and write. There are a million ways to do math. If we try to force them all into one at the same exact time, regardless of what their actual needs and capabilities are, then it just ends up being very frustrating.
Oh, I'll shout an amen. Amen to everything you said. That is exactly true. I mean, I love how you've recognized that. I think it's interesting in some of European countries like Finland, they're actually pushing back the formal instruction back to like 7 because they're realizing that kids are missing out on that playtime. I've noticed too that children aren't as creative. They haven't had that time to develop that side of their brain where they can just imagine whatever, and just make it in.
Yeah.
Everything's a game. Oh, amen to everything you said. So how has we've kind of talked about that. How has your paradigm and your educational philosophy changed over time and with experience? Is that because of, now being a mom, being on the other side of it that you're seeing it, or did it kind of just slowly progress along where you could recognize that?
I think when it really started to change predate the birth of my own child. I think that it actually started when the school where I taught, which was an ungraded school, so that students were grouped more by age and sort of developmental readiness, but there were not any grades as such. So there was no first, second, third. At some point in time in the middle of my experiences at the school, they changed to a semi-graded system. They didn't call them grades, they called them something else, but they were pretty much grades. And as the curriculum began to tighten around that, I started to notice a lot more restrictions. I started to notice more emphasis placed on standardized testing. I started to notice just more rigidity. And then recess and lunchtime began to be taken away. Snack time was taken away. And I just noticed more and more discipline problems I felt as a result of this. And now this year, our lunch and recess is down to only 20 minutes apiece.
Oh my
So that's
goodness.
barely enough time to get your class downstairs. They have to figure out where to sit. They have to get everything unwrapped. And these are kids, many of whom have fine motor issues, and so they all need help. They don't have any time to practice those vital communication skills with their friends. Talk about socialization, which everyone feels happens in school. Well, not if they only have 10 minutes to sit and eat, and then they get a couple of bites in their mouths and it's time to go. And then they have a couple of minutes of recess and that's it. And I don't feel that that's enough. And I feel that it creates a lot more problems than it solves. But I think that I had faith when I first started out that school kind of was the answer, that there were a lot of struggles, that if we could just figure out how best to educate kids, that smart people are going to figure it out. They were going to pass that along. Some new buzzword was going to take care of it. You know, as a graduate student, you're all excited about all these terms and these new programs, and you try it out. And then after a couple of years in the system, then the next program and buzzword come along, and then the next program buzzword comes along. I think right now it's the Common Core. By the time that was introduced, I'd already been teaching for long enough to know that just having a set of new requirements is not going to fundamentally change a child's daily experience.
Wow.
Or it might change it for the worse.
So the top-down approach to education really doesn't work. I mean, we've got to give the teacher in the classroom the ability to, move her class. I mean, do you feel that way, or do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that as educators, I remember being really nervous as a graduate student about interacting with parents. I mean, I was all of 21 years old, really in charge of a whole class of children. And some of these students were very vulnerable. I mean, these were kids who were nonverbal and who had a lot of developmental and family issues. But they always teach you strategies for managing families, for managing parent communication. But everything's already decided before the children walk in the door. And even if the teacher is good and notices that something needs to change, they're not going to families and asking parents what they think. They're not asking their opinion. They're not asking for their input, unless it's really a significant problem, like, I don't know what to do with this kid. What do you do with him at home? Maybe that could help me. But there really isn't any space for the parent voice to be even in the classroom in most schools. And nowadays, there really isn't even room for the teacher's voice. It's the administrator's voice, the bureaucrat's voice, the politician, or Bill Gates's voice, or whoever, happens to be contributing the funds that year. But, I really started to feel like it was all competing voices, and the voice of the child and the voice of the family was really just drowned out. I started to dread when my own child would enter school and I would have to sit down at the parent-teacher conference and take issue with things that were going on and basically be told, well, that's the way we do it here. And then my choice is to either pay extra to have my child attend school somewhere else, or the choice that I ended up making, which was I've been a teacher of other people's children for a long time, and I feel like I have a lot of that I can bring to my own child. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to actually have the freedom to do that, and to not be beholden to what my principal's current opinion on something is this week.
Yeah, it is really nice as a homeschooling parent. You can direct the education to fit the child. And I would imagine that, some of your frustration in the school system is that, they basically can't customize it for that individual child. But I love how you're talking about how parents are they are vitally important to a great education for your children. And if you don't include the family, you're not going to see the results. So
yeah, and you can't, as a teacher, there really isn't space to include all the families because they may have very different goals and values for their children. They may want you to try to do something. Like, I actually have a student right now who is having a lot of trouble socializing with the other children for a lot of different reasons, but his mother has very specific opinions about what would help him. Well, in order to implement those, I would need to change a lot of things about the program that then other families might find doesn't work as well for their children, or they may have different priorities. So you're trying to start to juggle the needs of a lot of different people, and there might be times where the class functions really well together, but I don't have the flexibility to say, okay, well, this is a time when some children need X and some children need Y, so the children who need Y are going to go over here and do something else or be with older or younger children who might be able to work with them. I'm sort of limited by the structure of the schedule and the physical environment, and I feel like as a homeschooling parent, you really have the whole wide world at your disposal, and you can give your child a formal experience in a particular subject or group of subjects, or you can give lessons, or you can go to a museum, or you can go outside and actually observe something instead of just reading about it or talking about it. And I'm really looking forward to having all of the entire world become my child's school instead of just the four walls of the classroom.
Yeah. Well, and speaking about socialization, I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit there. What do you think about socialization? What do you think it means to be socialized? I mean, a lot of people worry that when they start homeschooling, you know, that they're going to have socially backwards type children. What's your feeling on that?
My feeling is that school has always been very inadequate for true socialization, because my definition of that is learning to live together. And that means not just kids who happen to be born in the same calendar year, but that means all people. I had the experience growing up. I was a very good student, but my socialization at school was pretty miserable. I was labeled as an overachiever. People used to tease. Getting good grades was considered good, but also like a little bit of a goody two-shoes or teacher's pet kind of situation. As I got older, it got better because I was able to connect with other students who had the same interests in extracurriculars, but that was the sticking point. It's extracurricular. It's not actually part of the school day per se, but it's the after school or the lessons where you're pulled out of class. And I feel like these days it hasn't changed enough. Maybe we pay more attention to issues like bullying or issues of teasing or denigrating others who may not fit our definition of what cool is or what acceptable, part of an acceptable group, but we still have a really significant problem with that. And I don't feel that the school environment helps children understand the whole of society. It separates them artificially from younger and older children. It separates them from adults. Many of my students have no idea what their parents do for a living. They have they haven't seen their grandparents in a long time because of the school calendar not being able to travel very often. I recently showed them, we do this video that is designed to help focus and calmness, and it's different people on the screen. And when an older adult came on the screen the first time, they all started to laugh. And I think it's because they felt uncomfortable. They actually felt uncomfortable seeing an older adult in front of them. And we had to stop and talk about it and have a lesson on the fact that we have to respect all people, not just those who are the same age as us. And I don't know if that would have happened if they had regular contact with adults in their home community.
I doubt it.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Wow.
I think that all children ask questions and are curious when they see someone who's different from themselves. But when that happens with my child, I mean, he encounters older adults all the time in the building where we live. And so he's learning that they are people and that he can interact with them. He's
and that they have a lot to learn.
Friendly.
He has a lot to learn from them as well.
Absolutely. And I feel like the artificialness of the school environment really deprives children of opportunities to learn from others. And it makes them artificially dependent on a very small group of peers and the shows that they watch on TV or the clothes that they happen to be wearing that season, or what silly, like what little rubber wristband or whatever is cool for 3 months. I mean, they get really super focused on that because to survive socially in that environment, you either have to fit in or be very confident in yourself. So basically, you're socialized to conform.
Yeah. Well, and I recently read an article, I think it was from Forbes magazine or whatever, that talked about how when children come out of school, they really don't have any networking. I mean, and that's why we see so many college students struggling, because they they've been locked in a situation where everybody that they know is kind of the same age. And so a lot of our career opportunities happen because of our networking. And if they haven't been able to develop that and they don't know people older, or they don't know people younger, then they really struggle to get kind of up off the ground professionally because they don't have those networks.
And absolutely. And I think that the ability to find and learn from a mentor is extremely important in most fields, whether it's science field, business, really any field. Also, just in terms of their self-identity, knowing who they are in a group of people and being comfortable with the choices that they're making. I think that it's very difficult when you're with the same kids year after year, as you are in many schools, and you really are dependent. You don't have the option of saying, you know what, I'm going to find people with more similar values to myself or more similar interests. And I work with kids who happen to have sometimes very specific narrow interests or areas of expertise. And I end up sitting in parent conferences and I'm telling parents, it's going to get better as he gets older. He can join a robotics club, or he can play sports, or I'm suggesting things outside of school where their children will be able to connect and make some friends, which is ironic because the point of school is supposed to be socializing these kids, but really their opportunities for socialization are not at school. And so they have to put up with the school kids, that aren't really on the same wavelength, and then they can go out and make friends where they actually can find like-minded peers.
Yeah, which I'm sure affects their academics as well, when they're struggling that way. So what would you say some of the biggest obstacles you face are, and what are some things that you've learned from those struggles?
Oh, it's been a difficult couple of years for me personally. One reason is just some issues in the family in terms of, my parents' health, things like that, and unexpected financial stuff. And it's been very stressful for a time, but when you undergo a really stressful situation, it brings your core values and priorities in life into really sharp focus. All the extraneous stuff falls away. So you realize that some of the day-to-day things that you were worried about, or some of the image that someone else might have had of you, is really not important, and it frees you to really focus on what is important. I love this saying from Eleanor Roosevelt that a woman's like a tea bag, and you only know how strong she is when she's in hot water. And I really feel that that's true for me, that having my priorities tested has really helped me to become stronger. Not that it wasn't difficult while I was going through everything, but, now I feel like what I want for myself, for my family, for my child has really come into very sharp focus. And so I'm really excited to be making the transition and get going.
Yeah. And I would project, just my own experience is that you will feel happier, when you're finally free to be who you are and not have to conform to what other people think of you. It's hard, not having that support, but at the same time, you feel an overwhelming joy because you're working at your life's passion versus just, doing something because everyone thinks you should. Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors.
Hey, fire starters, are you looking for a new way to listen to the Luminous Mind? Try listening on Stitcher. Haven't heard of Stitcher? Think of it as radio on demand. You can listen to the Luminous Mind anytime, anywhere. There is no downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. Just stream your favorite podcasts such as The Luminous Mind. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad, and also from your favorite internet browser. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And make sure you rate and review The Luminous Mind so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Lisa, teacher and school-at-home mom. Let's kind of talk about what you're doing at the
the Museum of Natural History.
Yes, let's talk about what you're doing at the Museum of Natural History and then your curriculum, what you've been working on developing.
Absolutely. Well, the Museum of Natural History in New York City is a really great resource for anybody who is interested in the world. It has exhibits on everything from dinosaurs, which is actually the thing that it's known for, like Night in the Museum.
Yeah.
Although they don't come to life at night. I've been in the museum after hours. Unfortunately, I can testify they do not, unfortunately, come to life at night. But it also has a lot of exhibits on animals and space, and I think my favorite's probably the ocean room. But what I'm currently doing there is developing a curriculum for young students who are coming to take classes either on the weekends, after school. They also run summer camps starting at age, I believe, 5 to 6 and going all the way up through middle and even high school. And I am as an instructor in that program, and I'm also developing the archaeology curriculum and the solar system curriculum for the younger students. And we are also undergoing a very significant professional development process. Funnily enough, it's perfect for what I'm going to be doing with my own child because the focus is really on child-directed learning and informal learning environments and how to support a single child or a group of children to explore, to have opportunities to interact with materials and information and develop their knowledge and their interest and their passion and not have it be a traditional school experience.
Well, and I think,
so I'm really excited.
I think it's pretty awesome we were talking about this before I started recording for the podcast, that what the museum came to you and asked for. I mean, they didn't want somebody who came in with a formal, teaching curriculum. Yeah. To kind of expound upon that. I mean, what they're looking at.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I interviewed for the summer camp position, which was the way that I started working at the museum, although my role has expanded a lot, one of the things that my boss said to me was, I see that you currently work at a school. That's really not what we're looking for. We really don't want a teacher to run a classroom as though it's a traditional classroom. These kids are here because they want to be here. They're here after school. They're here on their weekend. They're here over their summer. If they wanted to go to school, they would just go to school. We're trying to provide something that's different, and they really feel that the way of having children direct their own learning, come up with their own questions, and do the thinking themselves rather than having an adult structure and think and prepare and deliver it to them as though they're a passive recipient, really feel that that informal model where the child really directs is superior and leads to better learning outcomes. And so I'm really excited because it really fits in with my own philosophy, and it really fits in with what I would want to do with my own child.
Yeah.
So,
and it's also
what
fitting
I'm going to
in.
be doing. Yeah.
It's fitting in with what you're seeing over there. I mean, we talked about the laws in New Jersey, where you say you're at, are very laxed, and you're able to homeschool without informing. But in New York, it's not. But what are they seeing over there? I mean, as far as school choice and self-directed learning goes.
Yeah, I would say that because New York is so strict, and New York is one of only 2 states in the country, I believe, that still has a Regents curriculum where high school students have to pass very rigorous tests. They have very specific requirements, even down to very specific topics that parents have to cover in their homeschool. And they're very rigid in terms of their public school system as well. But the museum is actually working on developing a program for homeschool children because they're seeing an increase in the number of families who are taking the plunge and doing it.
That's pretty amazing, especially with the rigor.
Yeah. Yeah, but
parents
are really dissatisfied with the public system and the Board of Ed system in New York City. If you take a look at what's been on the news for that the last number of years, it's just been one sort of ridiculous thing after another. And they have a really big job. It's a very big school system. There are a lot of problems. Private school in New York is as expensive as a year of an Ivy League college. And that's every year for a child, 12 years worth of school. And a lot of these kids start school young. So they're interviewing to get into private school when they're 2 or 3.
Wow.
They're taking standardized tests for these private school admissions. So it's insane all the way around. And I think a lot of families are looking at their finances and looking at their children's eager faces and thinking, we don't want to do this. This is a race to nowhere. So they're looking for something else. And I know that is something that I really resonate with too, because that is not something that I want my own child or family to have to experience.
Well, and I read an article on that recently too, that some of the parents are looking at the cost that we spend on the public school system, which some of those kids come out of that system not even being able to read or not reading well, or, not at a college level, versus how much private school costs. And they're going, why are we spending so much on public school with this kind of outcome when our private schools that cost this much, maybe a couple $1,000s more or even a couple $1,000s less, are producing a better outcome?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to it, but I think the answer to it is that when you have a small number of people making decisions for a vast number of diverse families in different situations, and relying so much on the parent support at home as well, then it's almost impossible to get it right. And it's really no fault of the people who are trying to make the system work. I think they really are. I haven't met anyone who went into the system with the express intention of messing it up. But I do think that, the way that it is structured politically and the way that it's financed and all of the competing interests, not the least of which is the testing companies and their interest in perpetuating the system that we have, that it would be very difficult to do it well without tearing it down and starting from scratch. But then you get back to the problem of needing to support many different students and their choice and their ability to direct their own learning. Do we even need a structure? I don't know. And I'm thankful that I'm not in public policy, because it's a very difficult question to answer. But I really question whether the system that we have is really going to end up being a system eventually, if enough people get tired of it and opt out.
Yeah, well, and the hands of the teachers are really tied by the bureaucracy. So let's kind of move into your curriculum. I think I mentioned in your bio that you're starting kind of your own curriculum, and what's your inspiration behind it? And then tell us what services you're going to offer families.
Yeah, well, I started a new website. It's called schoolatHomeMom.com. That's the website. And I'm going to be actually doing a countdown first. So, as we mentioned, I'm wrapping up my final year of teaching. So I picked September 8th as the start date for officially starting to homeschool myself, even though I'm going to have the summer with my son as well. I'm going to be using that time to really get the whole system ready. And the way that I'm thinking of doing it, there's going to be 4 modules. And the first thing, I think, is just getting to know your own child. And so I have a lot of experience getting to know students and their learning needs and styles. Also, I think for new parents, looking at state requirements and looking at different curriculum choices that are out there. And I think also examining their own way of learning and what worked and didn't work for them and what resonates with them, because they're going to be doing the work as the guide or the mentor or the facilitator or the instructor in their own homeschool. And so I think first sort of figuring out that process, and then looking at the child and the way that he or she learns, or children, what kind of skills and talents and aspirations they bring to the table. I can already tell my son's going to be very musical, and he's going to be very verbal just based on what he looks like already, and he's not going to be a risk taker. He's afraid of a lot of things. He's slow to warm up. So when I'm thinking about designing educational experiences for him, if I were designing them for myself, I might be like, hey, let's go on a big hike and let's see the volcano. Like, that's not going to be my kid at all. My kid needs to learn about things first, soak them in, get used to the idea, maybe see it on TV, maybe, I think for him it's going to be a longer process, but I think that you have the freedom to really set things up in a way that sets up your child for success. And if they have to practice their spelling jumping on a trampoline or doing hopscotch on the floor, be more active, if you sort of gather that information, then the next step is to start thinking about unit planning, or if you choose to go that route, I know that there are lots of different ways that people choose to structure it. Do you want it to be more of a keeping a series of notebooks and more of a classical style? Do you want to focus more on, for me, I think the way that I prefer to do things is to pick sort of the theme or like the social studies or science content and have that be the core, and then structure reading, math, and other subjects around that so that everything is very integrated. And that is how I naturally think, because that's how I have always planned my curriculum when I was a teacher in a more formal setting. But sort of going through all of the different subjects and thinking about what options are out there, what works, what doesn't work. If you have a child with learning needs, there are some research-based programs that are more effective when teaching those students, and anyone can become trained in them. It is not preciously classified information that only a licensed teacher can access. And in fact, when the school where I work, we run a program every summer that's about multisensory reading and spelling instruction, and anyone can sign up and be trained. So I would be advising someone who wanted to homeschool their child with dyslexia or another language-based learning disability. I could provide advice in terms of what programs might be particularly effective for them, and there might be some training involved for the instructor. But, when I was a new teacher, I had to be trained too. No one goes into their first year of teaching magically knowing all of this. I think that's something that all homeschool parents need to realize, is that teachers don't have some classified magic knowledge about students and learning that is secret and not able to be shared. Yeah. Anybody can learn how to be a great teacher to their child.
Well, and what I love about homeschooling, it really does create a family learning process. And I think your children actually learn to love learning because they see you having to learn to teach them, even, having your learning right along with them. And I just see a lot of, especially many of my close friends, how they've changed over the years, and their lives are much more, they're in training and development, they're not out doing lunch with the girls, or they're doing some serious study themselves. And so it's just an amazing experience to create a family learning environment. So what benefits do you project in being able to homeschool and then also delivering your product? What are some of the benefits that you feel will come from that?
Well, first of all, just going off of what you just said, I think that as an adult, learning constantly and growing is what it's all about. I really believe that. I used to say when I was in college, if I could just be a student forever, I would actually love that. And I do have to say, I went to an Ivy League college, but I went to the only one where there's no core curriculum and you can take any subject pass fail. And so I just had to put that in there because people have this idea of getting into college and all these rigorous requirements. There are educational institutions out there, even very prestigious ones, that also recognize the value of choice and freedom. So that's not directly answering your question, but I felt like that was important to say because that really instilled to me the value of just learning something for its own sake, or because you want to, not because some distant person who doesn't know you thinks it's a good idea. But in terms of actually answering your question, as far as benefits, I think that, like you said, learning together creates so much opportunity for growth, both in the adults in the situation and the children. And I don't think that there will be any limits on what children will be able to do based on, what's considered underachieving or overachieving, and what does that even mean anyway. But, I really want people to be able to find joy in their child's learning experience. And when you sit down with your child to do something new or to help them through a difficult skill, or, to work really hard on something, that you do it out of the spirit of growth and discovery. So many parents tell me that when they sit down to do homework with their kids, it's like tantrums and crying and battles, and they fall back on my authority as the teacher saying, well, Lisa really wants you to do it this way. And so if they say that it comes from me, then the child does it. And so it undermines their authority as parents and puts it on me as someone outside the family, convincing their child to get through this difficult experience that someone's making them do. And I really want to just erase all that and empower people to just say, I've had so many parents say to me, can you tell my child he's supposed to read every night? Because if you tell him, then he will. I try to get him to read and he won't. And I think that's horrible. It never registered with me. That is something that changed when I became a parent, because I was thinking to myself, if I have to go to my son's teacher and beg her to convince him to do what I'm asking, something's just really wrong with the situation.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, I don't like being put in that situation either. It's just as icky to me. And, but why do we have to make children want to do these things in the first place? Once that coercive element is in there, I feel like everything starts to fall apart. and it becomes a power struggle. And what I'm really looking to do is to empower people to flip that all around and make it a fun, joyful experience of discovery and celebrating natural talents and abilities and working through the frustrating stuff, because, of course, not everything comes equally easily, and there might be really a lot of value in working through something that doesn't come naturally, but you have to do it in the right spirit or it feels like a chore and a frustration, and I don't want to, and power struggle. And I want to really change that all around.
You said so many things. I could point out little tidbits, especially the fact of, you create a situation where the child is more reliant on the teacher. And I see that. I mean, when you pull yourself out of that figure of like, you're the one who's kind of helping this child development, and you put a teacher in there, you've got to be very specific what kind of teacher you put there, because that child then begins to trust that teacher like he would a parent. And you as the parent have replaced yourself with that teacher. Does that make sense? Or, I mean, is that kind of where you were going with that?
It absolutely does. Yeah, absolutely. And it extends into more value-based things. I mean, I have my own set of values. I have beliefs about how people should behave and how people should treat each other and things like that. But I definitely have encountered families who, whether it's their religious beliefs that are different from mine, their beliefs about gender, their beliefs about how much eye contact a child should make with an adult when they're speaking, how formal or informal. My students call me by my first name, but a couple of generations ago, the idea of calling your teacher by your first name, some people might not even approve of that. But one example that comes to mind quickly is two kids got into an argument and one child kind of shoved another, and he got in trouble because he shoved someone else. And the parent said, well, I told him that if somebody bullied him, he should defend himself. And so rather than the parent and the child working through that issue and like, was that the right thing to do? What does our family believe? What do our values teach us about using physical force? Then it becomes, well, the school discipline code says that if he shoves someone else, then this has to happen, and the other kid get in trouble. And it's totally about school rules, school policies, and it's not about what actually happened between the two children and if they were acting in accordance with, their morals and values.
Yeah, and to fit the situation.
Yeah.
I've heard situations where kids are bullied over and over and over, and then finally they've had enough and they punch the kid, and then they're the ones that get in trouble. So that's an interesting. So Lisa, can you tell us what some of your long-term goals are?
Sure. First of all, my first long-term goal is about my own child, and that is to really help him grow and develop as a person, and any other children I may have also. This is the one that I have right now. Ultimately, I'd love to, when he's a little bit older, start to travel with him, because that was such a big part of my early adulthood, and I learned so much from being out in the world. But then, later as he grows, and I'm sort of thinking about how instead of just helping one child, I can help others also. I do want to share our experiences with the world through my website. I'm thinking of writing a series of books, consulting with families who have specific needs or concerns that are my areas of expertise, and also continuing to work with the museum and helping them to develop, hopefully, this program for homeschooled families so that they can really take advantage of the resources that the museum has to offer and have it really catered to their specific needs.
That's great. I'm really excited to see where you go. It will be fun. So what advice or encouragement would you give to someone who's just starting out? Maybe another teacher or even other parents that are thinking about the education of their children?
I think first and foremost to trust in themselves as learners, that you're not born knowing everything that you need to know. And like I said, a teacher who is new to education or a parent who's new to parenting, there's so much out there that can be learned that the first and foremost, you have to trust yourself that you are capable, that whatever you don't know, you can find out. If you need something, there are people to ask. And that you try something out, and if it doesn't work, you change it. And you trust yourself and you trust the process, just like you trust your child, that your child will develop in his or her own time, in his or her own unique path, but that all children are born ready to learn, whatever that might look like for that child. And even children who I've worked with who had some very significant challenges, they all learn. They learn in their own time, in their own way, but they all grow. That is the human condition, is to grow. So I think that is the main advice, to just trust yourself and trust your child.
Yeah, and that your children, I love the fact that, we all have that desire to grow. We don't need to be pushed into doing that, because that's naturally there. So
that's what life is. Life grows.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have a favorite book or resource that you'd like to share with us?
There's many. I've read so many books, but I think the one that really resonated with me, it's called Guerrilla Learning: How to Give Your Kids a Real Education with or Without School. And the reason that I love that is that, first of all, it recognizes the reality that every family situation is different, and that in an ideal world, everybody could just pull their kids out of school and do whatever they wanted. But, even if that's not you at the moment, like with me, because I'm finishing up a job, it still gives a lot of great information about how to best support your kids as they learn. Then it lists some different things that you should really structure your environment to include, like giving your kids opportunity, honoring your child's interests, giving them the freedom to explore, giving them the support, and sort of being flexible with your timing. I think it's all just really good advice, and it really resonates with what I know about child development after seeing hundreds of kids develop from little ones into some of them are adults. And I really think that this was a great book that I read early on when I was thinking about homeschooling that really resonated with me.
That's a great resource. I have not heard of that one. I will have to check that one out. So So if you could leave a legacy, what would it be?
I think overall, aside from, like I said, supporting my own child and into becoming the person that he chooses to be, I think I would really love to change the conversation about what it means to learn, what it means to be educated, and what role that plays in the development of our society. Because I feel like currently our society is very confused about what it means to be educated, what it means to be smart, why we want kids to develop the skills that we're asking them to develop, what our goals are for them in the future. And the truth is that we're preparing them for a future that we have no idea what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in school, the internet did not exist. Cell phones did not exist. Most of the technology we depend on every day that can provide you with a livelihood, there's no way I could have been prepared for that as a child, because no one even knew that it was going to happen. So, I really think we need a change in the conversation about what it means to learn and be educated, and I would really like to be a part of that.
I would love to see children that we trust their intuition. Like, I look at my 7-year-old, and he can operate a computer or a device much faster than even my 16-year-old, and I just think with that skill, he's going to have an insight into, some new technology that might be better, that might work better, and if we trust that, I can just imagine where our society would go. If we trust that people can have their own, even somebody as small as a 7-year-old can have an idea for how something can work better.
Yeah.
So
and it's when societies allow that growth that real change can happen. And when societies become stagnant and micromanaging is when things start to fall apart in history. Yeah. So, I really feel like we need to open ourselves up to those possibilities and, like you said, trust our kids.
Exactly. I love it. We've had a great conversation. So before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words of advice or maybe a favorite quote you'd like to share? And then give us your contact information, how our parents can get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Well, my one quote that I picked that I think is just really sums it up is by Anais Nin. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And I think it's really true, both for kids who are taking their first academic risks and for us adults. And my contact information, my website is schoolathomemom.com, and I'm also on Twitter or Facebook, various places, but School at Home Mom is where you can link to all of that. So come and visit.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where you go. It's been such a fun conversation. Thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about, how education has changed in your life. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Lisa, School at Home Mom, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Also, be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list so you can receive notifications for our weekly audio blog, The Spark. We would love to have you join our program. Do so by going to the scheduling tab and become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website, theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Google+. Get our audio content on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.